What's going on, Bottom Line viewers? It's Mitch here of the Bottom Line View, back with another NFL debate. In this debate, I'm going to be debating over the two receivers that people widely consider the greatest receivers in NFL history. That is Randy Moss versus Jerry Rice. I'm going to debate their career stats, regular season and postseason, their career highs in a season, per game stats, best seasons, accolades, awards, records, skill sets, player variables like who they played with at quarterback and other positions, their impact on their team, and their offenses, and much, much more. So let's start off this debate by going into their career stats. So in this debate, it's going to be a statistical debate, but it's also going to be looking at how good the actual player was, separated from his team and separated from all the statistics. So let's get into the career stats, and let's start it off by saying Jerry Rice did play pretty much like 100 more games than Randy Moss. Jerry Rice played 303 games while Randy Moss played 218. Jerry Rice actually sustained success in the NFL all the way up until the age of 40, where he ended up retiring in 2004, which seems like a pretty ridiculously long career for a wide receiver. It's actually the most games played by any individual player at a position not named quarterback. Randy Moss played 218 games in his career, which is still very impressive, a career that went from all the way from 1998 till 2010. Where he ended up retiring on the Tennessee Titans, a year where he played for the Vikings and the New England Patriots. The receptions, Jerry Rice wins this category with 1,549, Randy Moss with 982. Yards-wise, Randy Moss also fails to get to Jerry Rice's level. Jerry Rice had 22,000 yards, 22,895 yards to be exact. Randy Moss, 15,292 yards. Yards per reception, Randy Moss does win this category. 15.6 yards per reception, while Jerry Rice had 14.8. Touchdown-wise, Jerry Rice holds the all-time record for touchdowns, receptions, and yards, obviously winning all three of these categories with 197 touchdowns. Randy Moss had 156 touchdowns in his career, which is actually second place. So a wide gap between first and second place. Rice wins the career statistical category 3-1. In the per game stats, Jerry Rice also wins this category 2-1. In receptions per game, Randy Moss has 4.5, while Jerry Rice has 5.1. Yards per game, Randy Moss 70.1, Jerry Rice 75.1. Touchdowns per game, Randy Moss does win this with 72% of the time Randy Moss would score a touchdown, while Jerry Rice 65% of the time he would score a touchdown. So Jerry Rice wins the per game stats and the career stats 5-2. Then we go to the playoff stats, where Jerry Rice again takes over, the greatest playoff receiver in NFL history. Games played 29, which I believe is right up there with Tom Brady for the most amount of games that any player has played in a postseason. Randy Moss, 15 games played in the postseason, which is also a pretty good number. Reception-wise, Jerry Rice, 151. Randy Moss, 54. Yards, Jerry Rice has 2,245 in 29 games, which is pretty close to 2 seasons worth. Randy Moss, 977 in what is basically 1 season's worth. Yards per reception, Randy Moss wins this category with 18.1 yards per reception in the playoffs, which is a pretty big number compared to Jerry Rice's 14.9. Rice, much more the possession receiver. Moss, much more the deep threat. Touchdown numbers, Jerry Rice wins 22-10, which is also the record for receiving touchdowns. I don't remember who's second, but I do remember that Julian Edelman is third. It's a random stat. Julian Edelman is third in receptions, and he'll soon be second in receptions in playoff history. So if anybody's going to catch Jerry Rice in receptions or in any of these categories, it might be Julian Edelman. Receptions per game, Jerry Rice 5.2, Randy Moss 3.6. Yards per game, 77.4, Jerry Rice, which is 2 yards higher than his regular season statistic. Also, Randy Moss had 65.1, which is 5 yards lower than his regular season statistic. Touchdowns per game, Jerry Rice is also better in this category than he is in the regular season. 76% of the time, Jerry Rice would score a touchdown in the playoffs. 65% of the time, he would score in the regular season, while Randy Moss went 5% lower and also 5 yards lower from the playoffs and the regular season, 67% of the time compared to 72% of the time in his per game stats in the playoffs. So Rice wins the playoff argument, no questions asked, 6-1. Now, when looking at these playoffs, you also have to consider that Randy Moss in 8 playoff games with the Vikings had 9 touchdowns, 723 yards, and over 20 yards per carry. So that averages out to 90.4 yards per game when playing with the Minnesota Vikings in 8 career games, scoring over a touchdown per game and almost averaging 100 yards per game. So that is very impressive for Randy Moss's early career as a Minnesota Viking. So at any point, if Minnesota was going to win a Super Bowl, it could have been with Randy Moss because the guy was absolutely amazing during that tenure. Career highs in a season. This is an interesting debate because we take the career highs of both players and we match them up in categories like receptions, yards per catch, touchdowns, receptions, all that stuff. So going through it, Jerry Rice does win this category as well by a surprising margin, 6-1. Actually, the only category that Randy Moss does win is touchdowns in a season, which of course Randy Moss had 23. In 2007, Jerry Rice had 22. Receptions wise, Jerry Rice 122 in 95, while Moss had 111 in 03. Yards, Rice also wins this. He held the record for yards in a season until Calvin Johnson broke it. Jerry Rice had 1,848 yards in 1995. Randy Moss, 1,632 in 03. Yards per catch, 20.4 for Jerry Rice, I believe his second year in the league. In 1988, or no, maybe that was a little bit past that, but he also had a very high number early in his career. Randy Moss, 19 yards per catch as a rookie. That's the rookie stat for Randy Moss. Touchdowns, Moss wins by 1, 23-22. Receptions per game, Rice 7.6, Moss 6.9 in 03 and 95 respectively. As you can see with Jerry Rice, a lot of these are in 95, and for Randy Moss, a lot of these are in 03. Those are their 2 best seasons, like statistically across the board. You could say that Randy Moss's 07 might have been a little bit better. Yards per game, Jerry Rice had 115 yards per game in 95, while Moss had 102. And touchdowns per game, Jerry Rice scored 183% of the time in 1987. So that means he almost scored 2 touchdowns per game in 1987, while in 07, Randy Moss scored 144% of the time, and that is the league record for most touchdowns in a season. But again, if you remember, Jerry Rice scored 22 touchdowns, I believe, in only 12 games. So that's uber impressive to me. So far in the statistical categories, Randy Moss has not been able to keep up with Jerry Rice. But some statistics I do want to throw out here when it comes to Moss and Rice. We look at Randy Moss in his 10 seasons, best 10 seasons versus Jerry Rice's 10 best seasons. And actually the statistics are very similar. Jerry Rice still wins, but it's very close. Now, Randy Moss played 157 games in 10 seasons, while Jerry Rice played 156. Very close. 824 receptions for Moss, 893 for Rice. Those are the widest margin of numbers. Then you look across to the yards and the touchdowns. Moss, 12,907 yards. Rice, 14,196. Touchdown-wise, Moss only 6 less than Rice. 143 for Rice and 137 for Moss. Then you go to the 20-plus and the 40-plus yard catches, and Moss clearly takes those categories. Moss had 192 20-plus yard catches in 157 games and 74 40-plus bombs in 157 games. So that's absolutely ridiculous. Now, looking at those statistics and those numbers, we can take an argument and kind of compare it. All right. So Randy Moss in Jerry Rice in all of his years had a Pro Bowl or All Pro quarterback and was also playing for the revolutionary West Coast offense. So Jerry Rice at the time of his career, especially his early career, was playing under arguably the best head coach offensively in NFL history, while Randy Moss was creating his own offense by himself. And you also have to factor in that Joe Montana and Steve Young were, for the majority of Rice's career, his quarterbacks. And that doesn't tarnish Rice's numbers at all because they're still fantastic and they're still the best of all time. But with two Hall of Fame quarterbacks throwing you the ball, they're obviously going to be better. Now, taking into account that Moss only ever played with one Hall of Fame quarterback outside of Brett Favre in half a year when he was going to retire, we take Randy Moss's numbers in 2 years with Tom Brady, and they look like this. So averaging them out between 2007 and 2009, Randy Moss averaged 91 receptions, 1,300 yards, and 18 touchdowns in 2 seasons with Tom Brady. So he was averaging 18 touchdowns, over 1,300 yards a season, and 91 receptions a season. And that's over 30 years old. Imagine if Randy Moss would have had Tom Brady in his early 20s. It might have been a little bit different. It might have been closer to 1,600 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 100 receptions. So Moss was still great when he played with Brady, but he wasn't quite the same player that he was in Minnesota if you do watch the games. Through Rice's first 7 seasons, he piled up 9,069 yards and 93 touchdowns. While in Randy Moss's first 7 seasons when they came into the NFL, before being traded in the 2004 season to the Oakland Raiders, Randy Moss piled up more yards than Jerry Rice, 9,142 yards and 90 touchdowns, which is 3 less touchdowns. Rice had Montana as his quarterback for those years. Although Montana did miss all of the 91 season, Jerry Rice came in to replace him. Steve Young came in to replace him to throw to Jerry Rice. Now, during those 7 seasons that Montana had Rice to throw to, Rice had Montana passing him the ball, and Steve Young was passing the ball to Jerry Rice. In those 7 seasons, Randy Moss, in his first 7 seasons, had guys like Brad Johnson, Randall Cunningham at the end of his career, Jeff George, and Dante Culpepper, Todd Bowman, Gus Frerotte, Spurgeon Wynn tossing him the football. So he still had more yards with guys like Spurgeon Wynn and Gus Frerotte throwing him the ball, and Rice had only 3 more touchdowns with Montana and Steve Young and the West Coast offense. So what I'm trying to say here is the argument could be one of 2 ways. You could side with the argument that Randy Moss maybe is the better pure player because if he was put in the situation Jerry Rice was put in, things would have been a little bit different. Or you could say, hey, Jerry Rice's numbers are the facts and they back up the claim that Jerry Rice is the greatest of all time. So you could be on one side of the fence or the other. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a fair argument for both sides. Then we go to the career achievements. 1,000-yard seasons, Jerry Rice had 14 1,000-yard seasons in 20 years, while Moss had 10 and 14. So Moss technically had more 1,000-yard seasons in less actual seasons played, but because Jerry Rice has more of the total and he had more longevity with it, I'll give that category to Jerry Rice. 10 touchdown seasons, Moss had 1 more than Jerry Rice, 9 to 8. 15 touchdown seasons, Rice had 1 more than Moss, 5 to 4. 100 reception seasons, Rice had 2 more than Moss, 4 to 2. 15 plus yard per catch seasons, Rice had 9 and Moss had 9. So that's a tie. 100 yards per game seasons, both only had 1 in 03 and in 95. Top 10 in touchdowns, Rice was 12 times in 20 years. Moss was 9 and 14. Top 10 in yards per catch, Moss 4 times to Rice's 3. Leading the league in touchdowns, Rice led it 6 times, Moss led it 4 times. Leading the league in yards, this is an interesting stat. Rice 6 times, Moss 0 times. Interesting stat, even though there was more receivers to catch the football for more yards when Moss played. So, there's guys like Torrey Holt. Like, even in that year where he had 1,600 yards, Torrey Holt actually led the league in receiving yards because he had like 1,600 something. 20-plus yard receptions. Rice had 191. Moss had 219. And 40-yard plus receptions. Moss had 76 compared to Rice's 45. So, those are tied. If you added that all up, Moss had 6, Rice had 6. So, in their career achievements through all those categories, both tied. All right, so let's get to the career awards where Rice clearly shines with 13 Pro Bowls compared to Moss's 6, 10 first-team All-Pros to Moss's 4, even though I have no idea how Moss was only voted to 4 first-team All-Pros. All-Decade team, Moss was on the 2000s first team. Rice was actually on 2 All-Decade teams in the 80s and the 90s. Offensive Rookie of the Year, Moss won that. Rice won a Super Bowl MVP and 2-time Offensive Player of the Year. Rice was also a 3-time Super Bowl champion, so Rice gets the awards. Then looking at the records for both players, this is actually closer than you would think. Because Rice does hold the main records, but besides those main records, Moss holds more single-season records, and he also holds more interesting records. So let's get to Rice. Rice has the most career regular season games played by a positional player, 303. The most career receiving yards, receptions, touchdown receptions. The most career yards from scrimmage. The most career touchdowns from scrimmage. So those are basically the same statistics there. Most career all-purpose yards, most career all-purpose touchdowns because he has the most touchdowns and the most yards, so that makes sense. Most seasons of 1,000 or more receiving yards, 14. Fastest to reach 100 touchdowns, fastest to reach 12,000, 13,000, 14,000, and 15,000 yards. Randy Moss. Randy Moss has the most touchdowns in a single season, the most touchdowns as a rookie, the most seasons with 17, 16, 11, and 10 or more touchdowns, the most games in a season with 2+ touchdowns, the most of 2 players to have 16,000. Okay, one of 2 players, to have 16,000 yards and 16 touchdowns in a season. The most yards receiving in a Pro Bowl. The most touchdown scores in 10 games with a new team, the Patriots. Most 1,200 yard seasons to start a career. Averaged at least 1 reception touchdown in 4 seasons. Youngest player to 100 and 120 touchdowns. Most receiving yards before 30, most receiving touchdowns before 30, youngest / fastest player to reach 5,000 and 6,000 receiving yards, and the highest career yards per catch. So those are very even, but because Rice has more of the career records, I will give Rice the advantage in the records department as well. Now we go to the skill set, where the skill set for a receiver is going to be hands, jump ball, separation, yards per catch, or yards after catch, toughness, and route running. Now, Rice wins 2 of those categories, toughness and route running, but Moss wins the others, yards per catch, which they're kind of close. Rice was actually sneakily good after the catch. Separation, I think that's pretty close, but nobody could separate down the field like Moss could. Leaping ability, clearly Moss, and hands, clearly Moss, as well as the fact that Rice did come out and say he used Stickum. So by default, I'm going to give it to Moss. So the skill set does belong to Randy Moss. Then going to the variables, which is also a category that would strongly side to Randy Moss's favor, which makes this debate an actual debate. Because if we're going strictly off numbers, Rice is clearly your guy all day, every day. But looking at the variables, it's clearly Moss. So Moss was a part of the 2nd and the 5th highest scoring teams in NFL history. At both times when he played for them, they were both the 1st highest scoring team in NFL history. So he broke his own record in 07 from 98. Rice's longevity is very impressive and produced on every team he played for, minus the Seahawks in 04. Rice was extremely clutch in the playoffs, the best playoff receiver of all time. Randy Moss changed the way defenses played versus top receivers due to the ability he could go deep down the field. He changed the way defenses play defense. You know what I mean? He changed the way they play defense, literally. They went from the defense they were playing to more of a cover 2 or a cover 3, double coverage. No player before Moss required that much attention on him during a game. That's the way he changed it. There is a term called "you got mossed" for a reason. Jerry Rice's work ethic and determination were the best that any receiver has probably ever had, and they were unmatched. Consider Randy Moss's impact in these simple things right here. Look at the Green Bay Packers draft in 1999. After Randy Moss torched the Green Bay Packers for 343 yards and 3 touchdowns in 1998 in 2 games, Green Bay used its first 3 draft picks to draft all defensive backs. So that is how much of an impact Randy Moss had, not only on his divisional opponents, but also across the league. Randy Moss is the only player to play for a 16-0 and 15-1 team in the entire history of the NFL. The 8 quarterbacks with whom Moss has played at least 8 games with have averaged 48 more yards per game, seen their completion and touchdown percentage rise by an average of 3.7 percentage points and 1.6 percentage points respectively, ultimately averaging nearly a full yard per attempt better with Randy Moss than without him. 1 yard doesn't really seem like a lot, but when you actually look at yards per attempt when judging quarterbacks, Peyton Manning is at 7.7 and Neil O'Donnell is at 6.7. So that is the difference between 7.7 and 6.7. So comparing quarterbacks now, after those variables, these are more variables essentially. Jerry Rice played with these quarterbacks: Joe Montana, Steve Young, Jeff Garcia, and Rich Gannon. All of them were a Pro Bowl player. 2 of them won MVPs. I don't think Rich Gannon won an MVP. No. He was close. Jeff Garcia went to Pro Bowl. Gannon went to the Pro Bowl, went to the Super Bowl. Garcia, I don't think was an All-Pro ever, but he was a Pro Bowl player. Young was a Super Bowl champion and a MVP. Montana is considered one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Randy Moss played with 12 quarterbacks. He played with Tom Brady for the best season of his career. He played with Brett Favre for the last season of his career. He played with Randall Cunningham, where when he played with Randall Cunningham was basically a guy that was off the street. I mean, he was nobody anymore. And when he started passing to Randy Moss, he ended up becoming the comeback player of the year, an All-Pro, and a Pro Bowler. Dante Culpepper, and we know how he ended up after Randy Moss, was a 3-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, a touchdown leader, and we saw the way that he ended up, because after Randy Moss left Dante Culpepper, not only did he stop going to Pro Bowls and stop being on the All-Pro team, but he threw for 86 fewer yards per game and 1 less touchdown per game, which is insane. When Randy Moss played with Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco, it was both their first season of prominence. Interesting. Brad Johnson, he made him. He made Jeff George, because Jeff George had the best rating of his career. Matt Castle, it gave Matt Castle the opportunity to become a starter after that 2009 season in New England. He became a starter in Kansas City. Todd Bowman was the NFC Player of the Week in 2001, throwing to Randy Moss. Gus Frerotte had the best rating of his career with Randy Moss. Andrew Walter was just terrible. Vince Young, Aaron Brooks, Brian Hoyer, Rusty Smith all threw to Randy Moss. Spurgeon Wynn threw to Randy Moss. All these bums threw to Randy Moss, and he made them better. So that is the debate. Randy Moss versus Jerry Rice. Those are the variables. Those are the stats. I hope you guys enjoyed. Now it's time to decide. Who is the greater receiver, Jerry Rice or Randy Moss? Let me know in the comments below. By my tally, Jerry Rice wins the tally 24-10 over Moss, not including the variables, the quarterback conversation, and the skill set. Now, if you throw the skill set in there, you throw in the variables, and you throw in the quarterbacks, you have a very interesting debate. Looking at the debate, the tally is 24-10 for the statistics. Rice owns the record debate over Moss. Moss owns the variables and the skill set debate. So depending on your perspective, or depending on how you look at what is a great player and what is a good player, what is the best player, how do you value that? So for me, it depends on how you value the player. If you look at greatness and you say Jerry Rice is greater because of the stats and it backs it up, or you look at Randy Moss and say, hey, this was the best pure player at the wide receiver position that ever played, then you could make that argument. But for me, I have them equal. And I don't want to take the easy way out, but let me put it this way. If I had one game to play, I would pick Randy Moss. If I had one career to pick and one season, I would probably pick Jerry Rice. It just depends. I would pick a motivated Randy Moss over any receiver in the history of the game because he is the best pure receiver ever. But maybe if I wanted one catch for a first down, I'd pick Jerry Rice. And if I wanted one touchdown, I would pick Randy Moss. It's a very difficult discussion. Jerry Rice has all the stats, the team accomplishments to back him up, while Randy Moss, you have to dive deeper and actually spend time to acquire these debates. You need to look at the players he played with and how he made his players better. Not that Jerry Rice didn't, but Randy Moss did it better than anyone else. So for me, it's a toss-up. It depends on what you think. And the best way I'm going to put it is Randy Moss is the better player, but Jerry Rice is the greater player. That is my debate for Randy Moss versus Jerry Rice. Let me know what you guys think. If you think I took the easy way out, then comment below. Let me know why I'm wrong and which one should you pick and which one actually was better. Was it Rice or was it Moss? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video. Subscribe for more NFL debates. It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View. Peace out.